Hey, my name's TC Burr. Welcome to Yet, a podcast created to encourage you to get your goal or idea out of your head and into reality. On this podcast, you'll hear stories, encouragements, tips, and ideas to help you write your book, start your business, launch your podcast, or whatever it is you hope to accomplish. Because it's not that you haven't done it, it's just that you haven't done it yet. My guest today is Valerie Morris. Valerie, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good.
Thank you so much for taking your time to talk with me. I'm super excited to hear a little bit about your story and specifically some of your expertise around marketing, which is a huge topic for authors. But wanted to kind of start off by kicking it over to you and just having you share a little bit about kind of who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So I run a digital marketing agency. I've had it for about 12 years now or so. And I, about 5 years ago, launched my book. And in the process of it, I very closely wove in my digital marketing with everything I was learning about publishing and book launching. And since then, I had people asking me left and right, hey, would you do what you did with your book for me? And so that evolved. And so now book marketing has become a bigger, dominant thing in the offer mix that I do. And so I've been helping authors from, first-time books to all the way up to folks that have full-on publishing deals and are going after, big bestseller lists outside of, kind of the ones that most people are going after. And so it's been a huge, huge range of folks that I've worked with. Outside of that, married, 2 kids, 2 dogs, 16 chickens, 5 goats, 2 barn cats. I can be found doing all sorts of fun things on the weekends, from hiking to mucking out a barn stall. So we have fun, work hard, play hard. So that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. I was not expecting the chickens. So a lot of that stuff, I was like, okay, check. And we get to the 16 chickens. That was a curve. That's awesome. So yeah, talk a little bit specifically about your book. What is it about? Was it kind of an extension of your business, or what's your book all about?
Yeah, my book is called We're All Yours, and it's all about how to get noticed and cut through the noise in a very, very noisy digital space. And so, yes, it's largely around the work that I do with my clients day in and day out. And a lot of them just have questions around, like, how do I actually break through? And so I wrote this book, and it was full of stuff that I'd been telling my clients in conversations. And I just was like, I need to just package this into one nice spot. This was also pre-COVID when this first came out. And at the time, I was starting to do a lot more public speaking. And so the book was actually a really great tool to get on stages and to have something to leverage to help promote my business while I was on stage, or whether it was like a live in-person event or was a virtual event. It's been helpful for me since COVID, and things kind of went virtual. And then I had 2 kids in that since COVID. And so, getting out in person events, I'm only just now starting to do, but the book has been a great tool for that. And so a lot of my focus has been around, like, with your book, how do you use it as a tool to help you big picture? A lot of people will write a book and they'll think, okay, I've got to promote this one book. But I would rather say, okay, what's your business at large? If you are, a consultant or a coach for something, and your book has some sort of tie-in to what you do by day, let's make it a strategic part of your business. Use it to help you grow and expand that business at large, that brand. If your book technically doesn't have much to do with your day job, maybe you've got a fiction book or memoir or something that's like very personal. My question would be, okay, you wrote this one book. If it's truly only your only book, great, promote that book. But if you think you've got more than one book in you, you actually have an author brand, and you have to treat the promotion of your first book and any of the work that you're doing as a writer in a similar fashion. So, I see a lot of people that make a website and they'll title the website or brand it around their one book, instead of titling and promoting their website and building it around the author who wrote that one book.
Yeah.
And so it's just a subtle mindset shift, but it's pretty profound when you think about like, okay, big picture, like how are we using this book as a tool for the bigger picture?
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So I think a lot of authors, when they set out to write, they're so focused on that project, right? Whether it's a nonfiction or
Mm-hmm.
fiction book, and you can kind of get kind of just laser focused and put the blinders on and think, okay, this is my whole world. But I love your perspective of like, okay, how does this book connect to your larger business or your larger, persona as an author? I think I actually one of your early podcast episodes, I heard you talking about author websites and that very same conversation in a lot more depth about, hey, do you go down the path of creating it just for that specific book, or does it make
Mm-hmm.
more sense to create kind of the author? So I love that perspective. It's super, super helpful. And speaking of, I mentioned your podcast. Talk a little bit about, that's actually how I found you. Talk about your podcast, why you created that, and what that's all about.
Yeah, so the podcast is called Bound for Bestseller, and it's really just some small sound bites of practical advice for authors to kind of take and run with. And it's really focused on this concept, similar to this website conversation of the business behind a book and the strategy behind a book versus just the logistics of getting something from, a few chicken scratches on a piece of notebook paper or whatever into a published book, which when you start going down the rabbit hole of making a book, you will come across all sorts of different companies that can help you. And a lot of them promise flashy things or whatever. And when it comes down to it, they pretty much just help you get your book into a format that can be sold. They don't really help you with any of the strategy behind it. And so it just felt like this thing that a lot of people, and I'm one of them. Like this all was born from me figuring out, okay, I have this book in me. I wrote this book. Now it's a matter of how do I publish it? How do I edit it? What does this process look like? How much time does it take? How do I get people on board to help me sell this book? How do I build a launch team? How do I, build up my email list to be promoting this? Like all of these things that most publishers don't even scratch the surface on. But there were questions that I had, and I see time and time again, other people have the exact same questions. And I get it. It's overwhelming, trying to launch a book. It's a big project, to write 30, 40, 60,000 words on something like that in and of itself is a big feat. But then to try to figure out, okay, yes, self-publishing is an option. There's also hybrid publishers, there's traditional publishers, but like making the decisions around what route to go. And then once you make those decisions, there's like a million other decisions that pop up that you have to answer after that. Book cover, when am I going to launch it? What am I going to call it? Like, what is, there's so many different things that you have to make decisions on. And ultimately as the author, like it stops and starts with you. Like whether you want to or not, you have to make some of these decisions. So it can be very overwhelming. And that's where like the podcast, I just was like, let's break down some of these basics so that it's very digestible. And I don't know, I've grown to love podcasts myself. And so that just was like, this is the format. Like we're just going to start, hit record and get a few episodes out. And then it's growing to the point where like, now I've got people that I'm like, okay, this will be a great interview to have so-and-so come on. And we're going to do some interview episodes. Maybe not all the time, but we're going to throw that in because now more and more I'm meeting other authors who either need my help or I'm meeting other authors who have done cool things where I'm like, other people need to hear about this.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. So talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, your process so one of the questions that I get all the time, because I'm writing a book also, mine is a novel, but one of the questions that I get when I tell people I'm writing all the time is, hey, are you going to do traditional publishing or are you going to do the self-publishing route? And I don't, it's a little bit TBD for me right now. I'm still I'm still in the process of writing the thing. So I haven't really gotten that far, but I'd love to hear from your perspective, maybe a little bit behind the scenes of kind of your journey and process of making that decision, and maybe some of the things to think about if someone is in that process of deciding, what route do I want to take when it comes to publishing?
Yeah, I'm honestly a big fan of self-publishing, but that came as an evolution. Like I had to get to that point.
Okay.
I actually started my journey working kind of within I joined a group of that was 4 authors, and they were really pushing the traditional publishing route where you write a pitch and you go find a literary agent and you're putting together the book proposal and all these things, and it just felt very overwhelming for me. And this group was like more for like memoir self-help type books, not business style. So I was
Okay.
like, their literary agents aren't my people anyways. These aren't the
Sure.
literary agents that I need to find. I would have to go do that research myself. But as I was starting to research it, what I came to realize was that these publishers, and even like I've got some friends that work in very big publishing houses, a lot of them don't do much when it comes to marketing. What the literary agents are often looking for is, what is your audience size? How big is your network? The publishers are looking for you to have a large enough population of people to promote the book to help give that initial boost. If you don't have
Right.
that, if
Okay.
you're a newer name, it's not that it's a no, but it's a more of an uphill battle to get a publisher to say yes, because they're looking to see like, oh, do you have the initial following that's going to help sell this book? A lot of publishers really don't do much in terms of marketing. And if they do, a lot of times it's a little old school in its thinking. It's not their fault. I just the publishing space is an old industry. When you think about like really up until the last 20, 30 years, like you had to go the traditional route if you wanted to have a book out in the world. You couldn't just
Yeah.
do a print on demand kind of a thing. It was very difficult to do so. And so this industry is very used to doing things a certain way. It's kind of like when I first got my first job in an ad agency. Facebook had just been released to businesses. Prior to that, you had to have a .edu email address. And so all of a sudden, all these ad agencies are thinking, okay, now we got to do social media for our clients. But the ad agency I was working at was used to doing billboards, TV commercials, newspaper and print ads. They did not know digital. And it was painful to watch when we would come and say, we need to do XYZ and we need to do it today because social media trends change so fast. And they would be like, well, we need to do a full analysis and mock this all up and then present it to the client and all this. And by the time we'd actually get something approved, it would be so yesterday. And that was actually one of the big pushes for me to like, okay, I need to go out on my own because this is too much red tape. I need to have more direct access with the client to say, here's a trend we need to jump on. Let's do this today. And they would be able to communicate and be on board with it. The book industry feels very similar to that. It's just used to doing things a slightly different way. And in today's world, when there are so many options for self-publishing or even hybrid publishing, you can get things out much faster. You can do things from a digital standpoint that they're just not even really thinking about. They're used to their tried and true ways to launch books in traditional bookstores and in their way. And, they're trying to change. Don't get me wrong. I see the effort, but I just don't think they're quite there yet. So that was one of my big concerns. And then when it came down to money, I just was like, I'm paying a hybrid publisher, for example, a lot of money up front, and then they're going to keep a certain number of royalties for the lifetime of this book. To me, it just felt like, well, I could pay somebody just as much or, less, depending upon the part of the process, to do the editing, to do the formatting, to design a cover. Like it requires more project management if you're going the self-publishing route. You have more control. And then you keep the rights and the ownership and all of the royalties for the rest of your life. Like you don't have to share that profit with anyone in the long run. So when it came down to it, it just felt like, okay, I need to do a little bit more legwork to manage this process myself or to hire the right people to do the different pieces and parts. But at the same time, I reap more of the rewards in the long run. So it's obviously not the right fit for everyone. Like I have a friend who he has a huge audience. He's gone the traditional publishing route for his first 2 books. He's probably going to stick with the traditional publishing route because that's what he knows and it's done well and he has a huge audience. But if you're just starting off, like you're going to be having to build that audience, whether you're doing it on your own or you're doing it with a traditional publisher. And you might as well keep more money in your pocket the first route. So those are just some of the things that I like to think about and just kind of some of my journey to get to my decision to go the self-publishing route.
Yeah, that's great. No, I love that. So it actually made me think of, so at my house, we got our attic finished a few years ago and we talked to a bunch of different contractors about, hey, how much, give us a quote, how much is it going to cost? And it was just astronomical. And we'd ask for like the itemized list. And there was like a $10,000 to $15,000 carve out for project management. And I'm like, wow, I'm paying someone else to just plan everything. And literally all they're doing is calling the electrician and all the other subs to do the work. So I was like, I can do that part. And it was hard. Like it was a lot more work on me, but we saved a lot of money.
Yeah.
We had control of when things were happening and, how they were happening. And so I just think that's an interesting parallel. So
it's a great analogy because I'm sitting here in my finished basement in my office here. It's same thing. We paid for somebody to manage the whole process, but part of it was you as the homeowner are still kind of micromanaging a lot of it behind the scenes.
That's right.
And it's like, well, gosh, if I'm going to do all that work, I might as well save some money in the process. But I get it. Not everyone has the skill set to know, like, okay, how do I hire a graphic designer to do my book cover and all of that? And so sometimes it's nice because there are people like me who have gone through the process where it's like, okay, can I hire Valerie to come in and manage my launch or to oversee the publishing process? I'm going to pay her for this part, similar to like paying for a hybrid publisher to do some of it for you. The difference with someone like me is like, I don't take the royalties long term. You're just paying me for my time on the front end to do that work for you. So if you don't understand or know what you need to know, there are people out there you can hire to do that one part of the process. The part that kicks me when it comes to the publishing space is just the royalties for forever and the ownership over the book. A lot of publishers will kind of put your book under their umbrella, and then you have to fight really hard, and it's very difficult to get that ownership moved over to your own account. So if you ever want to change the price on your book, or you want to put a new cover on it, or you want to change the edition or do anything, change the category that it's in, you forever have to go through the publisher. You don't have the ability to just jump in and do that on your own. So it's just a lot of these questions you want to ask from the start, whether you're interviewing, just somebody to do part of a project for you, or you're hiring a traditional or a hybrid publisher to manage your project.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we've talked a little bit about kind of audience, building an audience, marketing, getting your word out. Like that's kind of in your wheelhouse in general. And this podcast is for people who are setting out to do something big in their life, whether it's write a book, start a business, launch a podcast, whatever. But and I'm focusing here lately on writing because I'm writing and I'm connecting with other writers. But for anybody who's trying to set out in an entrepreneurial endeavor, like writing a book or starting a business, all of us have to figure out a way to get our name out there, get our products or services out there, right? There's a marketing aspect to any of this work, and specifically for writing, it's something you've got to do at some point. I was talking with a group of published authors here recently, and I asked them, hey, what is one of the biggest things that has been a surprise to you in your writing and publishing process? And I'm telling you, 90% of them came back with some version of, I had no idea how much work it was going to be to do the marketing aspect. I wish I'd started that part earlier. Like the marketing just kind of blindsided me. So I'm trying to get in front of that in my own journey and help some of the writers who are listeners of this show with that aspect of it. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on kind of why, when, and how should someone start thinking about marketing their book?
Oh gosh. Okay. So, I mean, you could have a whole weekend workshop on timing everything out the right way and everything. I think the biggest thing is once you know that your book is a reality, like you've written enough of the manuscript where there's no turning back, or your manuscript is done and you're putting it out, or maybe you've just started writing it and you know, I'm 100% going to finish this book. I only hesitate because I'd hate to start writing a book, get a third of the way through, and then like scrap the project. So I personally am a little cautious to like not say stuff too soon, but like as soon as you know yourself well enough to know this is for sure happening, start talking about it. And also, like once you get your book written, just know that like you can still tease out your book and the fact that it's going to be launching soon or next spring or whatever. Like you can keep it vague. But the reality is like a lot of people, as soon as their book is ready on Amazon, it's approved, it's all that, they'll be like, my book is live, here's the link. And they've put zero thought into building up hype, having any sort of like launch team helping them promote the book, any sort of marketing. They just put it out there into the world. I saw one person do that on a Saturday at 1:00 in the afternoon. Nobody was engaging on social media because it's the weekend. He had no build up to his book and he just put it out there. That's one of the big things. And I get it. You're excited. Your book is live. It's all been approved. It's ready to go. But the rest of the world doesn't have any clue. So you can still be working behind the scenes to make sure that your book is ready to really make a splash while also looking good. And, you know, the printing is all right and you've had your proof copies and all that stuff. Just do your best to hold off your excitement a little bit and put some strategy behind how am I going to do the build up to my launch day and make my launch day a big success. Whether you get your marketing strategy 100% perfect or you get it even 50% perfect, like as long as you've had some attempt at putting some strategy and build up behind it, you're way better off than my friend who just put it out there on a Saturday at 1 p.m. with no knowledge to the rest of the world that his book was even coming, you know? So you're already ahead of the game if you've put a little bit of thought into it, but you can get very strategic. I mean, I usually, when I'm working with a client, like we're working a few months in advance. We've got our date in mind. We're always working backwards from that date to build out and know what our milestones are leading up to it to make sure that we are ready to go. And we're usually going after bestseller on Amazon. We're going for #1 new release. We're going for getting, we set a goal of like, we're trying to get X number of 5-star reviews for the book, because all of those things are things you can use for the lifetime of your book to promote them afterwards. But if you don't put that thought into getting that from day one, it's a uphill battle from there on. So I like to do it with the initial release. But, you know, if you've already launched your book once and you want to do kind of a re-promotion of your book, like you can definitely go after some of these things. You're just dealing with a slightly divided attention because you've already put it out there initially. So if you can think about things now while you're still writing your book to work towards your launch day, like where you're at right now, you're in a great spot. You could start brainstorming ideas so that you are ready to really make a big splash.
Awesome. So one of the things you said, hopefully this doesn't sound like a completely ignorant question, but so your podcast is called Bound for Bestseller. You were just talking about your clients. Oftentimes they're going for a bestseller list or a certain number of 5-star reviews. Like, so for someone like me, that sounds a little curious, because I'm like, traditionally, I've just kind of always thought like, hey, if you write a book and it's really good, it's going to sell a lot and then you'll end up being on a bestseller list. But it sounds like there's a lot more. Like, how does someone go for that and target that in it sounds like a very strategic, intentional way to have that as something that you're shooting for? Can you talk just a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's similar to like ranking well on Google for a website. Like there's just a few basic best practices that like you set your website up for success. And a lot of it's around volume too. And so with books, that's definitely the case. And so that's why like when I'm building a launch team with a client, or I built my own launch team, I focused all of my efforts on launch day. I didn't focus on pre-sales. I didn't focus on like a soft launch and then letting it trickle in however I wanted. I wanted everyone to take action on the one day. And so as a result of that, like, I mean, there's a lot that I did to kind of prime my audience and also prime my launch team to make sure that they were all taking action on that day. But that's one of the big things, is just volume in a certain time frame. And I found that's easier for people as well, because you're really working. Now, granted, I was exhausted at the end of my launch day, and a lot of my authors are as well, but you're focused on one day. Like, you can do one day, but like the concept of like, oh, I'm going to start launching my book and I'll figure out the marketing later. You end up doing a lot more work in the long run to like get people to actually take action. Whereas like, if you're focused on that one day, like, you've got all this momentum around you. You've got people buying your book left and right, posting reviews, commenting on your social media, replying to emails, opening your emails, taking action and buying the book. Like, you've got the momentum that is going to help propel your book, not only on the algorithms of all of these bestseller lists, but you also have that momentum with like the reviews. Honestly, like, the reviews are one of the biggest things. I mean, think about how many books you've written a review for just because you were like, that was a really good book, I'm going to help that author out. I would venture to guess you haven't done it in weeks, if not months. Like, unless I'm part of like a focused effort and I have already opted in and said, yes, I'm going to help this person out. Like, I don't usually take the time. Now, part of it is like, I've got 2 toddlers and like life is busy, but like for me to just go write a review, it's a lot to think. Like, I have to really like the book and you have to catch me at the right time. I think most people are like me with that. And so I've just seen, the amount of reviews that come in later after the fact. It's really hard to get people to write a review for your book. But if you can focus their attention on the one day, you can get people to take action.
Okay. That's great. That's great. So one of my follow-up questions was going to be around pre-sale, but I think you already answered that one. That's not a thing that you really tend to go after, right?
If you're going to do the whole pre-sale thing, like on Amazon for something like that, honestly, like the day you release or make it available for pre-sale, in my mind, that's your launch day. That's the day. Whether or not they actually get the book in their hands or not, like, that's the day you'd be working towards to get people to take action. And it just feels confusing for a lot of people, Whereas like, if you focus on like the day where like, if they hit public or if they hit purchase, they can have it on their Kindle right there. Like, that's a lot easier to kind of sell to people. They understand that a little bit easier. Whereas like, you get people to pre-sale pre-buy your book. That's a little bit more confusing in people's minds. And then they're like, well, when does the book come out? When am I going to get that? Like, it just adds more questions. So I personally am just kind of like, forget the pre-sale. Don't add the stress to your life. Just focus on launching the book. And then build up the hype with your email, your social, all of the places where you have an audience. Just start teasing out the fact that your book is coming on whatever date you choose. That kind of building up hype, to me, works a lot better versus trying to trickle in activity while you're trying to get your book finished. Just focus on getting it finished and then launch. I will say there are other people with differing opinions on that. So you will see other people that have other opinions. And I think it's important, like, listen to podcasts like this, do the research to see like what works with your personality and what logic makes the most sense with, do you agree with my logic? Great. Do you not? Go for it. Like, do your own thing. I'm not going to sit here and say my way is the only way. So on that note, I imagine that every author's scenario is a little bit different and you've got to find what works for you. But one of the things I'm curious about is there in your mind an ideal kind of like timeline for a runway of like, hey, if your launch date is X, you should start your marketing activities on this date? Like, is there an ideal kind of
time frame that people should be thinking about, or is that one of those things where it just kind of depends on you and your audience and your season and all that?
Yeah, a lot of it depends on you, and how fast you can kind of get your ducks in a row. Or like if you're working with a publisher or a hybrid publisher, a lot of times they will tell you this is the earliest your book will launch, and you can pick a time around then to be able to pick your actual date. Now, what I typically like to do, and I have a few different calculators, but my most popular calculator, that we can throw in your show notes if you'd like, is a calculator that essentially says, like, you plug in your ideal date. Let's say you're going to aim for January 1st for your launch date. You plug in that date, and then the rest of the calculator spits out like the little other milestones that you should roughly aim for like, your launch team on board, your book cover finish, like some of these things that are going to be happening behind the scenes. And a lot of this is with the mindset of like you're working with a hybrid or self-publishing scenario, because a lot of times, like I said, your traditional publishers are going to dictate that schedule. But that's to help you as the author kind of be in control of like, okay, I need to have my EPUB version, my ebook version of my book ready by such and such time. Otherwise, I am really pushing it. Or I need to have my cover design done by this date so I can get proof copies of my book in enough time for launch. Those are the kinds of things that kind of does. But regardless of whether you use my calculator or you set your own thing up, I recommend people say, throw the dart or pick a date. Some people have specific dates based on like they want to launch on their grandfather's birthday because the book was about their grandfather. Like some people have hard dates they're working against, and some people it's like, let's just pick a date, pick a date that I know could work well. And you're working from January 1st, hypothetically. You pick your date, what date you're potentially aiming for, and then you work backwards. And you think through, like, realistically, formatting, editing, like think through all the different things you're going to have to do. Do you have enough time? If January 1st is not enough time based on like what you're looking and needing to do still, then you need to push it back. So I always start with, what is our end date? Do we have enough time and runway from there? And if not, like, again, push it back. Unless you've announced that specific date to the whole world multiple times, you can change your date. No one else is going to know.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great. I think that resource will be super helpful. Essentially, it sounds like hey, here's the date you're targeting. Now I'm going to give you basically a project plan of all the things that you need to do, all the big milestones along the way, which I think even just having that inventory, I think would be helpful, because a lot of people probably don't even know what all the steps that are involved, but then also kind of feathering in that timing and like suggested roadmap, I think would be super helpful. So definitely want to put that in the show notes as well. Couple quick questions and then I'll let you go. When it comes to format, so when your clients are coming to you and they have a book idea and they want to get it out, are they typically doing are they doing like, paperbacks only, Kindle version only, or is it a little bit of a mix? Do you do audiobooks? Like, is there a best combination to think about, or is that another kind of like case dependent thing? Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I would say ebook is pretty standard for everyone that I'm working with. Maybe children's book authors aren't doing ebooks as much, but ebook is pretty standard if you've got any sort of long form writing. But hardcover is something that's been fairly new in the last couple of years. So softcover is kind of the standard that like almost everyone does at least a softback book. Hardcover, you're going to see a mix of like, some people really want it. And then some people are like, I don't really care. So that's kind of a mix of, just because it's newer, as an option for self-publishing and for print on demand. I will say audiobook is becoming a much more dominant thing, and I'm seeing it becoming more and more of a necessary format. However, a lot of people will launch like just their paperback or just their ebook to start. And then as they have new versions, then it gives them something new to talk about to their audience. It may not be as big of a splash of a launch of like, oh, my audiobook's out now. But again, it gives you something to talk about, because once your book is out and you're trying to interact with your audience, after a while you might start feeling like, oh gosh, I mean, my book has a lot of great stuff in it, but there's only so much I can say about my book, But if you have a new format come out, then you can kind of get in front of your audience in a way where it's like, this feels genuine. This doesn't feel like I'm like really trying to pull something to talk about. It just feels really natural.
That's great. No, so it's almost like another like mini relaunch almost of your original work, but it's just a new format. I love that. Okay, couple last questions. So if you've given lots of great advice, and I'm going to point people to your podcast and your ways to connect with you as well. But if you could just give one final piece of advice. So think about the person who has, maybe they finished a draft manuscript, or maybe they're just setting out in their journey of writing. Like, is there a best piece of advice that you would give that person, either from your own experience as an author or from, your professional perspective of, what you do in the digital marketing space and the publishing space? What's the one thing you would tell someone who's at that point in their journey?
So I would say, like, the biggest thing is go in with your eyes wide open, that there's gonna be a lot of decision fatigue when it comes to launching your book, regardless of what route you go. And your mindset matters a lot. So, we all experience imposter syndrome, and it's a real thing. And so between the decision fatigue and imposter syndrome, it's very easy to get in your head and think like, well, who am I to write a book? And the reality is, like, the world thinks you are amazing because you wrote a book. Like, there are so many people that are so impressed by the fact that you just even wrote it, let alone like doing all the work to get it out into the world. So just do what you need to, or go in with that reality of like, hey, I'm going to hit these mindset blocks along the way. I know they're going to come up. I'm not going to be surprised by them, and I'm going to move past them. I'm going to make the decisions I need to, and not let this project just die on my hard drive.
That's great. Thank you for that. Okay, last question. This one's a softball. How can people get in touch with you, follow along with the work you're doing? Give me your social media website. Give me all the links.
Yeah. Okay. So I am probably most active over on LinkedIn, and you can just find me there with Valerie Morris. But yeah, my podcast, Bound for Bestseller. If you want to see the goats and the chickens and all that fun stuff, you can find me at Simple Life Vibes on Instagram. But yeah, LinkedIn is usually where I'm most active, and you can see all the fun stuff that comes out with the author platform over with Bound for Bestseller. And then in a lot of my show notes there and whatnot, I've got a bunch of resources with, some free downloadables, and also some very like one-off affordable classes. If you're looking for like, hey, I just want to learn how to build a launch team. I just want to learn the basics of that, or I want to figure out how to time things out, or I just need the framework for a marketing plan. I've built out a lot of some of those kinds of resources that are nice and affordable for the author that wants to do it themselves, or at least arm themselves with the information and then decide if they're going to do it themselves or hire out.
Awesome. Well, Valerie, this has been super fun. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you would do me a huge favor, if you got value out of this podcast, which I'm assuming maybe you did since you're still here, would you scroll down to the bottom of your podcast app and rate and review the show? And maybe share it with someone on social media or with a friend, just in a conversation. It would mean so much to get this message out to more people, and I think it would be amazing if you would share it. So that would be, as a personal favor to me, I'd really love it. Also, if you want to know more about me and what I'm working on, you can visit my website. It's tcburr.com. I hope you'll check it out. You can contact me there. Thanks again, and I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.